commentary on the true story of Jesus multiplying the loaves and the fishes to feed these 5,000 people. We're just using a different gospel for each one. It's in all four gospels. The only miracle Jesus did, other than rising from the dead, that's in all four gospels. And before we get there, I've picked some different memory verses to help lead into the theme of the day. So we're gonna read this one out loud. This is a favorite. I actually forgot to put the address. That's Luke 6:38. It's in your bulletins as well. But let's read this one out loud. Give, and it will be given to you, a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried to help children or really anyone learn a memory verse, but this one's a fun one because you can do all kinds of made-up actions. Just look at it. You can say, well, give, and it'll be given to you, right? You could do something like that. Give, be given to you. Good measure, right? So, good measure. You want that thing filled up completely. What's next? Good. Press down. Yep, good measure. Nice measure, pressed down. Shaken together. Running over. Now, what adds a little bit of excitement to this verse is something that they used to do when they went to the market in the first century. Women would wear an apron-type device on the front of their clothes. That's still common today. But when they went to the market, they would pay for a measure of whatever grain they wanted, and they would lift up the corners of their apron, and that's the way they would get it home. It'd be poured into their apron, okay? And so when it says, into your lap, that's what it's talking about. That the grain was kind of put into their lap. They were going to carry this thing home. Now, so the average woman would go to the average market and give a certain amount of money for an average measure. But that's not what this scripture says. It didn't say an average measure. It said a good one. Now, it's not a good measure unless you're getting more than your money's worth. So, it's a good measure, and, the person in the marketplace having a good day, so he says, you need more than a good measure. I think we're going to press that measure down and fit some more food in it. You can put it in. You ever gotten a box of cereal when you open it? It's about, where's the cereal? I just opened the stupid thing. Well, they didn't press it down. Shake it up, press it down. You could fit twice as much cereal in there, and then so the person's saying, yeah, I'm going to press it down. I'm going to pour it into your lap. And then what else does it say? Running over. That is what this verse is talking about. That as we give, and it doesn't even say what we give, as we have that spirit of giving in all of our life, God promises to overflow in our lives. Now, for too many years, I have taken this as a financial verse. And I say for too many years because I've been corrected recently about it. It works for finances for sure. But there's a more important component here that I hadn't noticed until I read the whole thing in context. So if you're a Bible reader, you want to read kind of before and after a verse to get the whole context of it. And I want you to listen to the context of this verse in Luke 6. You might be surprised. Jesus says, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners expecting to be repaid in full. But, so he says, that's the way the world acts. But you, my disciples, love your enemies, do good to them, lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you'll be children of the Most High, because he is kind to ungrateful and wicked people. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. So we haven't gotten to this verse yet. This is the context. But I want to tell you, I've been challenged by this. Maybe you have too. Because when you think people owe you a debt, you're not right. Somebody owes you. It's like you do something nice and they didn't say thank you. I got so ticked at Shine one day. Phil, the hardest house that you and I did power washing, that never even came out and said thank you to us. And look at the smile on that guy's face. He does everything with a smile. He did the power washing on their house with a smile for free, and they never even came out and said hi. We knew they were in there. Never even said thank you. Well, see, I thought they owed me a thank you. So I needed correction. I worked for somebody a few years back. Usually when you work for somebody, you expect, some pay, right? Usually, it wasn't an arrangement where I was doing this one for free. I didn't get paid in the first week, second week, third week, month, 2 months. And my spirit started to get sour about this. I was really angry. And God doesn't, he's kind of relentless. He kind of doesn't let you go. And as I was getting more and more sour and upset, I just felt like, you and I got to deal with this, God. It's killing me. It's killing me. And I got to this place by his grace where I just let it go. And maybe you've had to do that. You just got to let it go. And then peace floods in. It's like, that person doesn't owe me anymore. I'm living this debt-free existence now. You know what I'm saying? Where there's no looming transitions that I'm just like jonesing to have happen. Where you know what I'm saying? 2 years later, the dude calls and says, by the way, I got some money for you. What am I supposed to do? I let go of it. So you don't owe me anymore. Give it somewhere else. Find a mission agency or something. When God can do that kind of a work in us, we are free. We are free. So Jesus says, love your enemies, do good to them, lend to them without expecting. But to follow up to get to this verse, do not judge, you'll not be judged. This is supernatural. Do not condemn, you'll not be condemned. Forgive, and you'll be forgiven. And then this verse. Didn't say a word about money. Talked about forgiveness. Talked about mercy to people that don't deserve it. Talked about looking differently at our enemies. Forgive, it'll be forgiven you, and then give. And it'll be given you good measure, pressed down, shaken together. Made me kind of adjust my whole sermon today as I was looking at these verses, because I really like to memorize verses in the Bible, but you want to memorize it in context. And it caused me to think about the church in the book of Acts. If ever the church was right, it was in the book of Acts. In some ways, we long to get back to that sweetness, that innocence, that serving Jesus with all of our heart component that the world tries to rob us of. And as I began to look through Acts chapter 2, because you really didn't get the church in all its power and glory until Acts chapter 2. The Holy Spirit came down and filled them. And then it turned people that were kind of fearful into these powerful warriors that would do anything to serve Christ, right? And when the Holy Spirit came down, their lives changed dramatically. And so I'm going to show you something here from Acts chapter 2, if we could have that next verse. It says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, fellowship, the breaking of bread, and prayer. This is the church. Didn't have a building, didn't have any programization, so to speak, yet. Obviously, those things that come later. And everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs being performed. So you have this combination of God being mighty among them and them just being in awe of all that God's doing. There isn't one sense in which, Peter's laying in bed and saying, I wonder if I should go to church today. Because it was never a duty back then. It was something life-giving in it. So I want to be that kind of church. I want to be more life-giving, right? And look, everyone was filled with awe, and all the believers were together and had everything in common. That's incredible, just to have unity. It's obvious they didn't all think the same, but they brought unity to the table, letting offenses go. Letting those minor offenses go. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. So my statement above is my new idea about how generosity really works, and that is where there's forgiveness, genuine forgiveness and mercy, the people become joyfully generous. Not when there's duty, not when there's demands or pressure, but when there's a sense of true forgiveness and mercy for people. That's why we focus in on that second chance thing. It's like you can come here and get a second chance. And I try to talk with our people that might be in recovery, and I want to be sure it's a good experience for them. I want them to feel welcome here. They're no different than anybody else. We've all got a history, right? So we wanted an atmosphere of forgiveness and mercy. And now, I know I'm kind of jumping from bush to bush here, so just jump with me. Think about the loaves and the fish. Here's what happens in Mark chapter 6. You can look there if you want. But in Mark chapter 6, actually, you guys can look in the bulletin about the previous 5 points that we made. Thank you to Kevin Heichel, by the way. Is he here today? He might have had to go home and get some rest. But he did a great sermon last week on this. But Mark chapter 6 says, they went away, verse 33, by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. And many saw them leaving and recognized and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. Jesus landed and saw the crowd, had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him, and they said to him, hey, this is a remote place, and it's already very, very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. But he answered them, and pretend you were one of the 12 right now. You give them something to eat. You give them something to eat. Take care of it. There's 5,000 men plus women and children, 15 to 20,000 people, a fair sizable crowd. And Jesus says, you feed them. Well, the response of one of the disciples was, well, that would take more than a half year's wages, which would probably be true. Imagine, if the average wage is $40,000, $20,000 to feed this group. Are we to spend that much money on bread and give it to them to eat? And Jesus is thinking, I'm going to do more than give them bread. We're going to have a full-on meal here. So he says to them, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. So they went and found out and said, we have 5 loaves and 2 fish. And Jesus directed them to have all the people sit in groups on the green grass. And they sat down in groups of hundreds and of 50s, taking the 5 barley loaves and the 2 fish. Looking up to heaven, he gave thanks, broke the loaves, and gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. I love this verse. And they all ate and were satisfied. Disciples picked up 12 baskets full of broken pieces of fish, and the number of men who had eaten was 5,000. I want to add a couple principles to the 5 that we've given so far. And this first one, I'm just calling the permission principle, and it kind of goes like this. It's on the slide. When you observe someone that you respect doing something, you feel empowered to do it too. That's just the truth. So, to illustrate that, you're at a little bit of a better upper crust restaurant, not Mickey D's, and you're having a meal, and somebody else who who you respect, picks the most costly thing on the menu, $75 steaks. That'd be a good steak. They do sell for that, I guess, somewhere. I don't usually go to those places, but... And so you say, wow, that's so-and-so over there, this guy and his wife, and they attend our church, let's say hi. And when you greet them, because initially you're thinking, well, that's kind of a lot of money to spend on a meal. But you greet them, and they say, yeah, it's our anniversary. We're just here celebrating our anniversary. Here's what I'm suggesting just happened if you respect them. You become empowered to invest in your marriage too. Because you respect that person, you're seeing their example. Who knows, we could use a few more good examples on the planet. Not what they said, but what they did. You're in another restaurant with a bunch of believers, all just hee-haw and having a great old time, quoting scriptures back and forth, of course. You're just... And the waiter or waitress brings the meal, and someone at your table, the order is entirely wrong. Entirely wrong. And you're thinking, uh-oh. And that believer chooses to give absolute grace to the waitress and says, you know what? These things happen. Kind of busy here today. Could you just send it back and bring what else? And you're going like, well, I respect that guy or that gal. They did a cool thing. I might have even gotten upset about something like that. You were just empowered. You were given permission to do the right thing. It works both ways, doesn't it? So Pastor Larry steps out of church after second service and lights up a Marlboro. I'm not condemning anybody that smokes. I know it's a tough habit to break. But the truth is, if I do that, I'm giving people a lot of permission, aren't I? And so are you. Anybody that looks up to you is getting permission by what you do. And Jesus, by what he did, gave permission to act like him. He could have and maybe should have said, you know, I just lost my best friend, John the Baptist, my cousin. He was just beheaded improperly. I just need some time away. These people are following me all over the place. I'll give them something else to think about and then get rid of them. But it says when he got off the boat, he didn't have that attitude. As tired as he was, he had compassion on the people. He fed them a spiritual meal, I'm sure, unlike any other. And then he chose to feed them. He didn't have to do that. But Jesus is a permission giver. I think a lot of people see him as some kind of a rule guy about what you can't do. I would say we're more afraid of what we can. We're scared to death about what we can do. Rebecca just did it. That same opportunity's out there for you. You may not be a doctor, but there's something you can do. How come everybody's head looking down right now? This is good news. It's always been good news. Jesus is empowering his disciples to do miraculous things with what they have. Think about it. He says to those people, he says to his 12, just find out what you have. I'm not asking you to pull a rabbit out of a hat. I'm asking you to tell me what we have to work with today. There's 3 things the apostles had to do that day, and we disciples do too. There's just 3 things. I want to tell you, every one of them blesses the heart of God, and yet we need him totally to complete the project. The first thing is figure out what you got to work with. The secondly is get organized about it. And the third thing is to participate in the miracle. What do you got? We got 5 loaves, 2 fish. Jesus says, sit them all, organize this thing. Sit them all, probably so everybody would eat. 50s and 100s, get organized. And then just get involved in what I'm doing. Christianity. I've made a point about this a couple weeks ago when I was here, but I really want something. You take a simple story like that where you read it to kids, isn't Jesus cool? And then we go think about something else. The miracle did not happen in Jesus' hand. What he did, he took the loaves and he took the fish. It was a holy moment. He lifted it up, and he and his Father had a moment of connection. And he thanked his Father, like we should, for our food. And then he handed out to the disciples. And as the disciples handed it out, it just didn't quit flowing. They didn't run back to Jesus and say, hey, that half a piece of bread you just gave me, well, I gave as many crumbs away as I could and give me some more. No, the miracle was happening in the disciples' hands as they passed it out. Wouldn't you want to be one of those guys? Well, in a sense, we can be. Principle number 6 out of the 7, or we actually have 8 total by the end of next week, is we are most satisfied when God is at work instead of us. You say, well, weren't they working? Well, maybe. If I were to tell you there's a guy selling a Lamborghini, like new one, and you can buy it for $1, would you get in on that deal? I mean, if the insurance wasn't too bad, right? That's what this story is like. They were doing $1 worth of work and getting a Lamborghini in the process. All they did was figure out what they had, get it organized, and participate in a miracle. How much work is that? Jesus is the one that did the miracle through his people. We are most satisfied when God is at work among us. See, the thing we can miss so easily is that interaction between Jesus and the Father is still happening. They were getting a taste of it, but he's at the Father's right hand now, and they're talking constantly. And it says in the Bible that he's interceding for us according to the needs of the saints. That there's an interaction going on up in heaven about what we're doing. And so when we participate in something that he's leading us into, that interaction is helping to multiply those loaves and fishes. God wants us to live in the comfort of knowing our Father is with us when we move out in his name, and he completes the tasks that we can't. He is giving us the Lamborghini, and we're only paying the $1. So I have a question today before we go on to the seventh principle, and I hope it challenges us to just think a little more deeply about even why we're here. What happens here when we gather that is beyond human ability? Because, see, we could go to the Lions Club or the Elks Club or the Veterans of Foreign Wars. We can get people together. I want to ask, what happens here that's beyond us? My conclusion is that the reason you're here is that something does happen that's beyond us. So we do our part. We train ushers. We have sound people back there. We have a praise team. We get ready for the moment. We find and give our little loaves and fishes. But that's not what really keeps us coming together. What keeps us coming together is a component that's beyond the ability of any man to do, right? So you can hear a message and it does nothing. You can hear a message and it becomes ignited in your soul. That's God, right? You can shake somebody's hand, or you can have genuine fellowship that's a thing of the Spirit. That's God. You can meet a friend that really encourages you versus someone that's whatever the world offers. How many found they needed to get good friends after they got saved? Right? So I want to say one thing that draws us together is that the Lord's already been doing that and is increasingly doing it. We're starting to see some pretty good signs, by the way. Some of our young people are here in this service, and these are young people that, like myself, were partying, and I figured if I was going to party, I would do it right, so I wasn't the last in line for anything, and not that I'm proud of it, but I wanted to do it with all my heart, whatever I do. Now I better serve God with all my heart, right? And so I served the world in that way and found out it was a dead end and was pretty empty, as some of you have found out. And now we're starting to see young people turn away from that lifestyle. I can't imagine any better testimony than a young person coming to Christ. That is the proof in the pudding, because this world really tempts young people to walk away from the Lord and never look back. So we're starting to see some tremendous signs of God's hand at work in this day, and it's almost like the Lord is saying, just raise the sail, guys. I've got some wind to blow.